Greetings everyone, welcome to our presentation of Middle Ages Literature. Our group consists of 4 people. There are Cornelia Ratih, Ninditha, Veronica Aurelia, and Valy Anggun. We will discuss all about Middle Ages literature, from the socio-historical background until the medieval drama. Enjoy!
The socio-historical background of the Middle Ages. In the history of Europe, the Middle Ages lasted from the 5th to the 15th century. The Middle Ages refers to a time in European history from around 400 to 1500 AD. It occurred between the fall of the Roman Empire and the Renaissance. Historians usually divide the Middle Ages into 3 smaller periods called the Early Middle Ages, the High Middle Ages, and the Late Middle Ages. During the Renaissance, scholars and thinkers began to call the preceding era as the Middle Ages, as it separated the culture of ancient Rome and Greece. Some called the early period the Dark Ages when Europe was overrun by Byzantines and Arabs. These are the smaller period of the Middle Ages. The first is the Early Middle Ages. The Early Middle Ages is a period in European history that lasted from the 5th century to the 10th century. This period began after the decline of the Roman Empire and was replaced by the High Middle Ages. During this period, trends that began in the Classical period continue, such as a reduction in population, especially in urban areas, a decrease in trade, and an increase in immigration. This period has been labeled as the Dark Ages because of lack of literary and cultural work produced in Western Europe at that time. Next, High Middle Ages. In the High Middle Ages, there was a very rapid increase in population in Europe, which brought about major social and political changes from the previous period. In 1250, an increase in population had an impact on the economy, it reaching levels that were only attainable in the area around the 19th century. And this was ended in the late Middle Ages by a series of disasters, the most famous of which was the Black Death, but in addition to many wars and economic stagnation. And the last is the Late Middle Ages. During this period, there were famines and plague, such as the Great Famine and the Black Plague, which reduced the population to half. Apart from decreasing population, there are social tension and endemic warfare. France and England experienced serious peasant revivals. And apart from these problems, the unity of the Catholic Church was shaken by the Western schism. Collectively, these events are sometimes called the Late Middle Ages crisis.
Norman feudalism. The feudal system had been used in France by the Normans from the time they first settled there in about 900 AD. It was a simple but effective system where all land was owned by the king. Then, after the invention and conquest of England, the feudal system was introduced to the country by William the Conqueror. After his coronation, William claimed that all the land in England belonged to him. The main idea of feudalism is power and authority. Basically, feudalism is a political and economic system based on landholding, and protective alliance emerged in Europe. Next, hierarchy rulers. The structure of feudal society was much like a pyramid. At the top, we have the king. The king is the top leader in the land. He retained about 20% of this land for his own use. But he cannot control all of the land by himself, so he divided it to the barons. Before the king gave the land, the parents had to swear on oath of fealty to the king at all times. In return, the parents pledged their loyalty and soldiers to the king. When a king died, his firstborn son would inherit the throne. Second, we have parents. The parents ruled large areas of land called fiefs. They leased land from the king that was known as a manor. The parents reported directly to the king and were very powerful. In return for the land that had been given by the king, the parents had to serve on the royal council, pay rent, and provide the king with knights for military service when he demanded it. The parents kept as much of their land as they wished for their own use. Then they divided the rest among their knights. Next we have knights. Knights were given land by a parent in return for military service that demanded by the king. They also had to protect the parent and his family from attack. They also were the king's knight and could be called into battle at any moment by their parent. The knights kept as much of the land as they wished for their own personal use and distributed the rest to the villeins. And the last is peasant. Peasant villeins or serfs were given land by the knights. They had to provide the knight with free labor, food, and service whenever it was demanded. They had no rights, and they worked in a long days, 6 days a week, and often barely had enough food to survive.
In the age of faith, the Roman Catholic Church takes a big role in society's life, and this became the characteristic of medieval society. At that time, the church was more powerful than kings and nobles. Many great cathedrals were built around cities and towns. During the 4th century, Christianity was being legalized by Roman Empire, and as the result, education and laws as well were overseen by the church. The Catholic Church created schools with an intensive curriculum of Latin, rhetoric, astronomy, grammar, philosophy, and math. During the High Middle Age, many innovations took place in the creative arts. As you can see in the slide, there's a picture of medieval knight on a horseback. It is a symbol called chivalry, who combines warlike courage, Christian virtue, and refined courtly manners. The symbol overly shown as a marvelous pageant of glittering armor, with the beauty of emblazoned banners fluttering in the breeze and clear shrill call of the trumpets. Literacy has become a necessity, and new reading is aimed at the new literate public who has a time to enjoy the work. And as a result, a new middle class came into being. Next is the critics for the church. Under the Normans, England became part of the larger feudal world of the European Middle Ages. Much of the history of medieval England is a history of feudal welfare. Because of this, many medieval writers give voice to the people's yearning for a strong and just king who could unite the warring faction and let the people live in peace. Major theme in medieval English literature is popular resentment of the power and wealth of the church, and also the corruption of its servants. In the 14th century, there were many harsh criticisms of the church that would lead the era to the Protestant Reformation and to the century of religious strife.
In Middle Ages, drama started anew from limited beginnings. After the 10th century, liturgical drama spread over Europe, representing biblical history in Latin and in local tongues. These plays are known as miracle or mystery plays. They perform on a large movable platform or wagon, and the players would act out a scene from a Bible story. These performances became the pride and treasured responsibility of the trade guilds that were a large part of medieval town life. Gradually, it became parts of the large cycles of plays, starting with the story of the creation and ending with the story of Christ's life and suffering. There were also Christmas play and Easter play. Christmas play began with the angel's declaration to Mary, her reply, and dialogues with Joseph and with shepherds and kings. And the Easter play began with the entry of Christ in Jerusalem with procession and palm branches. At the same time, a different kind of religious play also became popular. It is called morality plays, and it presenting the teachings of the church in dramatized form. These plays use the method of religious allegory, a personified ideas, and the allegory presents a sharp contrast of good and bad. The moral value is made as explicit as possible. It delivers by repetition, so the writers can make sure that everyone in the audience remember the lesson. For example, in the summoning of every man, its characters are the personification of vice, virtues, and ideas such as God, death, fellowship, kinship, conscience, wealth, confession, good deeds, and knowledge. And throughout the story, we are able to know who's good and bad in explicit way. Medieval stories were related to romance. At first, it takes form of long poems, and then later, prose tales of adventures of knights and ladies. The adventures of the characters take us back to a fairy tale world of magician, dragon, and enchanted treasure. The heroes of these tales face tests of strength and wit. In medieval romances, the heroes and heroines have become the knights and the ladies of chivalry. The knights or the ladies were expected to have a chivalry behavior of courage, honor, and generosity on their act to solve a problem. Sir Gawain and the Green Knight was a famous story from Middle Ages that the author is remain unknown. It tells about Gawain, King Arthur's nephew, who accepted the challenge by the Green Knight. In his adventure, Sir Gawain was given two tests. The first is beheading test, to prove his courage as a knight, and the chastity test, to prove his honor as a knight. The Green Knight says that he will allow whomever accepts the challenge to strike him with his own axe, on the condition that the challenger find him in exactly 1 year to receive a blow in return. A year after that, the time comes for Gawain to ride out and accept the Green Knight bargain. On his way, Gawain encounters all sorts of beasts, suffers from hunger and cold, and grows more desperate as the days pass. Then, he stayed in a magnificent castle and was warmly welcomed by the lord of the castle and his lady and an old woman. During his stay, he was seduced by the lord's wife. On New Year's Day, he met the Green Knight and received his blow, but Gawain only bled a little. Turns out, the Green Knight was the lord of the castle, and he's giving Gawain test on purpose to see he's worthy as a knight. The story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight delivers the values of chivalry and Christianity, how people should behave on solving their problem, and as a human we have to prove our worthiness.
These are the references of our presentation.